Well, to get into this, we might as well start at the subject, Groundhog Day. Being an international audience, it's best to talk about what the term Groundhog Day means. It is a tradition in Canada and the United States. On February 2nd, if a groundhog comes out of his burrow and sees his shadow, he's frightened and goes back inside because he's expecting 6 more weeks of winter. There's a city in Pennsylvania that's turned this into an annual event. And of course, Hollywood has to have their spin on it, so they created a movie called Groundhog Day. The movie is about a reporter that goes to cover the Groundhog Day event. And each morning he wakes up, it's Groundhog Day again. He has some particular issues he needs to resolve. And until he resolves those issues, it's Groundhog Day again. He learns French. He learns the piano. He learns most of the people in town, but he still hasn't solved his problem. It's always Groundhog Day for him. That's the reason why this is called Groundhog Day. Our problem is we continue to have breaches. So why do we have these breaches? Technology keeps changing, and our users want to continue to overshare everything that they have, and business wants to take advantage of this new technology and gather more data so they can have better data analytics. All this creates increased risk to this data. What are we doing about it? We're chasing compliance. We're looking for the silver bullet. I believe it was Einstein that defined insanity as continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the world we're in. This slide is important for you to read and think about. This is by Bill Murray. He was an early information security guy from IBM. Information protection is a management problem. As such, it cannot be solved by technology alone. So let me get into where I'm coming from in this presentation. I've been involved in information protection for over 50 years. For over 30 years, I've been involved in information security management. I started in the mid-'80s and developed the program for mission operations at Johnson Space Center. That document on the right is called the Pink Book. That documents the program that we put in place. I'll talk more about that program a little bit later. I've also created 4 additional very successful programs and helped others create theirs. Through this process of 35 years of managing security, I've really only had 4 significant incidents that were reported, that we involved an external team or notified the FBI. So over 35 years, and those weren't really serious. In fact, one of the incidents that we reported to the bank that we thought we might have exposed 100 of their customers' data. We couldn't prove that we did not, so we were still reporting it. So it's a very conservative count of 4 incidents. So this is the philosophy that I've used over these 35 years of managing information. Information is an asset. We need to have principle-based architecture. We need to use data-centric controls. We need to monitor these controls based on risk. We need to continuously improve, and I will talk a lot later about a very aggressive awareness program. So first of all, information is an asset. It's an asset just like money, people, facilities. Can you imagine running your company out of petty cash or only interviewing 10% of the people you hire? This is incredibly important. Not only is it important that we get real about managing and owning this asset and protecting it, but when we as security people are trying to secure it, we need to secure it knowing we're not the owners. The business is the owner. And we can suffer losses without losing possession. The data can be encrypted, not available to us, or it can be exposed to somebody who could take advantage of something they shouldn't know. Accountability of the information asset is not considered as important, I believe, mainly because it's just more difficult to track all the bits and bytes. It's not just an accounting issue of pennies and dollars. There's just way too much information to manage it the way you would a building, people, or especially money. I mentioned that in the mid-'80s, I created the security program for mission operations at Johnson Space Center. Probably the most significant thing that helped me create that was strong executive support. My boss was Gene Kranz. If you're not familiar with the name, if you've ever seen the movie Apollo 13, he was the guy wearing the white vest. Mr. Failure is not an option. So in the mid-'80s, what kind of guidance did I have to create a security program? I had a mandate from my boss. There were some OECD principles that I mentioned here. And the Rainbow series was just starting to be created. The orange book that I mentioned there, you'll see orange book right in the middle of that stack of colored books. That was about all that was available. You can download those. You can go to the web and get the OECD principles. I believe Microsoft has an updated version about 2004. You can go to Google and get a copy of the Rainbow series. So I was looking at how do I put this together? How do I make it happen? There were no laws. There were no HIPAA, no PCI, no SOX, no data privacy guidelines or laws. It was just do the right thing. The interesting thing about this program that I put together is at the time there was a lot of discussion about what is security: confidentiality, integrity, availability, usability, functionality, and something else. There was all this. The program that I put together was based simply on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And contrary to a lot of programs today, we emphasize integrity and availability more in our program than confidentiality, because our mission was to keep the astronauts alive. The program that I put in place, I was honored to be given the Silver Snoopy Award by the astronauts. My lapel pin flew on the same mission as the Hubble telescope. And later, the NASA administrator came down and gave my team a special award for doing this and avoiding $25 million in cost. We did this by early development of risk-based principles. So now we move to data-centric controls. These are the principles that I talked about. The accountability principle is essentially the orange book. Awareness stands up by itself. We'll talk a lot about awareness in a minute. Ethics, what are the ethics of your environment? What are your culture of your company? The multidisciplinary aspect of this is so incredible. The early creators of the information security world were an eclectic group. A friend of mine had a PhD in psychology. Another friend had a degree in music. We came from all over, and we still learn from other disciplines. The United States FBI has a group called InfoGuard, and we look at 16 critical infrastructures: water, air, protection of water, air. You can learn things from looking at how other people solve problems. Proportionality. This means you protect diamonds and you put more control around diamonds than you worry about pennies or dollars. Integration. This is where it all comes together. This is incredibly important these days as we're building containers, software containers, where we're reusing code. We need to have strong integration processes to make sure it all fits together, because it was my experience when I was leading penetration teams that where one part of software touches another another part of software or goes through middleware, that's where you have opportunities to have more risk. Oftentimes it's easier to look at a picture than talk about words. So this is my picture for data-centric controls. You notice the purpose is to identify, prevent, detect, respond, and recover for my data. And I have three sets of controls stuck down here in the middle. What I say the middle, because on the left you have people trying to access the data on the right, going through firewalls. You'll notice that I have three different containers, because I might have a container that's got secret information. Another container might have just private information. So I need to separate my data out to how important it is. That's that proportionality rule again. My levels of controls, I talk about administrative, physical, and electronic. I can hear some of you screaming now. Electronic, no, that should be logical. Yes, it could be logical, it could be technical. Administrative could be procedural. Everybody's got their own slightly different flavor, but in my world, administrative, physical, and electric spell 8. It's something people will remember. And you notice the bottom of each one of those those controls are a little V. Yes, that stands for vulnerabilities. Now, in our world today, zero trust is a really good example of how we're pulling these controls together and making a reasonable, good solution. So monitoring risk. The principles involved are timeliness. You don't just monitor once a year or once a month. You need to stay on top of it. And you need to continue to reassess your controls. And the democracy, as you find risk, you need to involve everyone in what the risk is and how you're going to deal with it. That's the owners of the data, even the users of the data. You don't want to put a control in place that's going to cause the users to have to find some other way to do what they need to do. I mentioned methodology for managing risk, FAIR, which is factor analysis of information risk. This comes from the book Measuring and Managing Information Risk by Jack Jones. This gives you a good way of defining to the business that this really is a high risk, oftentimes using terms they have defined for you. Continuous improvement. When I was at the Space Center, although I had been to a W. Edwards Deming conference and read his book, my early use of methodology was something I got from the software engineering or got from engineering practices. Over to the right, there is an operational amplifier, has an input. And you notice the output is monitored by a feedback function, comes back in to counter, to keep it in check. This type of process improvement, continuing monitoring is what we used at the Space Center in the early days. Later, Deming was included in ISO standard 27001. Now, observe, orient, detect, and act OODA loop is the thing that's in vogue today. The important thing is you do something, you monitor it, is it the results that you wanted? If not, you have a feedback function. So we need to keep improving because the risks continue to change. The threats continue to change. And as I say, threats continue to change. They continue to stay the same. Early threats were floppies left around. You put the floppy in your computer and it's infected. Well, now it's thumb drives. So you need to not discard the ideas of old threats, but know the old threats are there and know new threats are coming. We continue to see changes by the business and user and the customer, and technology certainly continues to change. As a security professional, we need to influence that change. We need to share what knowledge we have, which is the reason why in retirement I started the company, Johnny Security Seed, where we can continue to share information. I also believe strongly in mentoring people. I've been fortunate enough to mentor about 4 CISOs, and we need to develop our future. The bottom line here that goes back to Bill Murray is the only silver bullet is the motivated, trained, and well-funded security professional. I gave you a hint before. I would talk about the awareness program, and I call it an aggressive awareness program. All too many companies have what I call a passive awareness program, which is like ethics training or sexual harassment. Once a year, you have to look at CBT and get through it and forget that you ever did it and go on until next year. That won't work here. You need to be actively involved with your user and customer. They're the weakest link. You need to have that connection. You need to have a once a year video and quizzes, but even that won't cut it. Ongoing communication to the user is essential. Where necessary, you need to have specialized training. And then you need to have a method to report suspicious behavior. In the last several companies I've been involved in, I would set up an email address, and if somebody had a question or comment about security, they would send it to us, and every month I would randomly select somebody on that list and give away $100 to $250 to a person randomly. People will rat their mother out for a chance at winning $100. So this is the way you can develop a dialogue, and the communication needs to be where the people are not afraid to ask questions. I've been in a situation where people more trusted coming to security to talk about issues than reporting an HR problem. That's important. That's how you have an awareness program. So here we have the summary slide. Notice at the top, you need to have strong executive support. If you don't have strong executive support, you need to update your resume. You're not in a position where you can win. I have multiple war stories of when I have needed to go to the executive and get help. Probably one of the really humorous ones, which was at the Space Center. We were redesigning the flight analysis and design system, and I didn't get invited to the meeting for the design of the system. But I showed up, and they're about ready to say it was good. And I said, what about audit? And we don't have money for audit, is what they tried to tell me. And I said, no, that's not the right answer. And they said, says who? And I said, me, but if you don't believe me, go ask Gene. And their response was, what do you mean by audit? They knew that Gene Kranz had really strong emphasis on information protection. No one was going to die on his watch. That's a quote out of the movie. Principles. You need to be able to use principles to help you think through putting the right controls in place. You can use a framework like in this cybersecurity framework, which I reference here: identify, prevent, detect, respond, and recover. Those drive three different types of controls: administrative, physical, electronic controls. These controls sit in between access on the left and then the data systems on the right. Now, you're probably screaming at me right now because I said administrative, physical, and electronic. Granted, some people say procedural instead of administrative. Some people say technical instead of electronic. Some people even say logical instead of electronic. But you can't spell 8 with those words. And I like administrative, physical, and electronic. So like I said, you have access on your left. This is from all your users, whether it be an employee or the customer, vendor, whatever. And then you go through your controls and you have your data groups on the right. Now I showed 3 different data groups here because, like I said, data is proportional. You don't want to spend a lot of money on something that is public information. You just need to make sure it's right. You want to get it out there. You're not concerned about the confidentiality. Whereas you may have some other information that's proprietary. You may have some information that's secret. So you need to separate your data and put your controls in the place where it's most needed. These administrative, physical, and electronic controls, you need to tailor them so that they will help you meet your compliance requirements. If you think through your controls properly, compliance will simply fall out at the bottom and it'll be a given. Compliance is a lag measure. If you have a security problem and you go to management and say, this is a problem, but we need to fix it, and they say to you, why? And your response is because of some compliance requirement, you need to change jobs. You're not thinking, you're not working through the security process. You can be replaced by a program. You need to develop these security controls so that you're providing the appropriate level of control for the particular data. Compliance, like I said, should fall out at the bottom as a lag measure. Also on the left, I talk about threats. You have physical threats, somebody breaking in. You have logical threats. Here again, I could have said electronic. But then you have audit threats. The physical logic in audit, PLA, is another good reference if you've ever dealt with a Chinese threat. So these threats are coming in as well as access by your users trying to come in. You need to monitor the activity of your entire program. You need to monitor your changing threats. on the left, and then on the right, you need to monitor the effectiveness of these controls. I show here access, identification, authentication, authorization, and audit. This is just some of the reference back to the Orange Book, some of the theory and principles that help keep us going. So with that, at this point, I will turn it over to questions.